Yeah, I think it's important for folks to know whether elected or whether appointed. It is what we call regulatory capture, which is a fancy way to say that the regulators pretty much respond to the utilities and to no one else, at least on the whole. And that's pretty common around the country. Unfortunately, it shouldn't really be that way. Even a lot of consumer advocates, people that might not consider themselves environmental at all, but just want the lowest rates possible, are frequently ignored by the regulators. And there are a few reasons for that. One is that there's a huge resource mismatch, right? So you're thinking about Alabama Power, who can spend, 50, $60 million, in which that's about what they spent, I think, last year, or at least in the recent year, and what they called regulatory expenses. And they're charging you for that, right? So they're charging customers for 50 to $60 million to do nothing but deal with regulators. Do consumer advocates, does Energy Alabama, does PJC have $60 million to go around and make sure that we are working the regulators and the legislators all day, every day? No, we don't, right? So if on a practical standpoint, that's who the people in office are seeing all the time, because they're spending that level of money and that level of time and that level of people resources. That's probably who they're going to respond to. It's kind of a human nature thing that's who you see all the time. So that's part of it. The second is that there is definitely a feature of campaign finance. It's a little different across the South, to be clear. In Alabama and Georgia, for instance, it's not legal. It is illegal for the investor-owned utility to give money directly to the regulator. But of course, there are lots of ways around that. Just because you can't directly give money, there are other ways to do that through PACs, or doesn't prohibit executives or the lawyers that represent those utility interests. And so essentially money from the utility interest will get its way into the campaign somehow, some way. Now, Louisiana is just wild because they allow direct campaign contributions from the utility, and they do that by the millions, right? So it's like Wild Wild West out there in terms of campaign finance. But even if you don't allow that, that is, it takes a really active legislature to clamp down that level of influence through the campaign finance system. And we haven't seen that level of interest by really any legislature in the South and most in the country. And that brings me to my last point, which is that the public service commissions in Alabama, Mississippi, and Georgia are creatures of the legislature, which just means that they were created by the legislature, they can be changed by the legislature, and they can be eliminated by the legislature. Which means that if a public service commission just does something that Georgia Power or Alabama Power really doesn't like, really doesn't like, they just go to the legislature and pass a law and say, everything the Alabama Public Service Commission just said is crap, and I want you to undo it. And we see stuff like that all the time. Georgia's actually got a good example of this where, in the run up to Plant Vogtle, this actually happened in a few states. The utilities didn't believe that they could get their public service commissions to agree to build these new expensive power plants. So they had to go to their state legislatures to pass laws which essentially tied the hands of the public service commissions to make them say yes, right? So it's important to remember that dynamic, right? Is that if you're an elected official, or an appointed official for that matter, anything that you say or do really can be overridden by the legislature. And guess what? There are no practical limits of how much money Alabama Power or Georgia Power can give to those people, right? So if you think about it, even though the influence may not be direct at the Public Service Commission, it's definitely directed at the legislature. And the people who serve on the PSC know this dynamic, right? That they can be overridden and threatened at any time. And in some cases, they could be removed from office, especially in gubernatorial appointment type of processes. So yeah, those are kind of the three main ways in which, you would think on paper having a voice with elected regulators would be a good thing. And I do personally believe, in its Energy Alabama stance, that it is preferable to elect your regulators than it is to appoint them, because we want the decision to be as close to the people as possible. However, there are other flaws in the system which blunt the impact, or maybe not the impact is the right way to put it, the influence of the people's votes because of the money in the system and the oversight from the legislature that can just undo essentially what the people's representatives may want. So that's kind of the lay of the land of how we got here.